The silence in the penthouse was a physical presence, thick and suffocating. It was a silence born of polished marble, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a glittering, indifferent city, and the profound absence of a single, vital heartbeat. Alexander Croft stood at the window, a crystal tumbler of amber whiskey hanging from his fingers, untouched. The divorce papers lay on the obsidian desk behind him, their crisp edges and brutal legalese a monument to his failure. Evelyn was gone, not just from the marriage, but from the city already photographed on the arm of an Italian shipping magnate. She had taken the art, the summer home, and a sizable chunk of his empire, but she had left behind the one thing she had never wanted, their 7-year-old son Leo. The boy was upstairs, a smaller, quieter monument to the same failure, a silent ghost in a house too empty for a child. Alexander's breath hitched, a raw, ugly sound in the pristine silence. He wasn't a man who cried. He was a man who acquired, who built, who conquered. But in this moment he was just a man, hollowed out, staring into the abyss of his own meticulously constructed, utterly lonely life. He had everything, and he had absolutely nothing at all. The new maid started on a Monday. Alexander had delegated the hiring to his assistant, stipulating only efficiency and discretion. He barely registered her arrival, a figure in a simple, dark dress, her hands clasped in front of her. He gave her a 5-minute tour of the cavernous kitchen, his voice a monotone of instruction. Leo's room is the second on the right. Do not disturb him. He's quiet. Meals are to be left outside his door. You are here to clean, not to engage. He ended with a final, cold directive. The West Wing study is not to be touched under any circumstances. Her name was Clara. She was in her late 50s, with eyes the color of rich coffee and a face that held a lifetime of stories in its gentle lines. She simply nodded, her gaze not subservient, but observant. Yes, sir. For 2 weeks the routine held. Alexander buried himself in work, conducting global meetings from his off-limits study, a shrine to his success and his misery. Clara was a ghost, her presence noted only by the impossible shine on the marble, the faint, clean scent of lemon and lavender that began to displace the sterile air, and the consistently nutritious meals that appeared for him on the dining table and for Leo outside his door. The first crack in his stone-walled world came from a sound. It was a Thursday afternoon. Alexander was on a tense video call, and weaving through the corporate jargon was a faint, unexpected melody. It was a soulful, aching spiritual, sung in a low, resonant alto, Clara's voice. She was humming while she polished the grand piano in the living room, an object that hadn't been touched since Evelyn's departure. A bolt of irrational anger shot through him. How dare she? This was not a home for music. It was a mausoleum. He stormed out of his study, intent on firing her on the spot. He followed the sound, but it led him not to the living room, but to the foot of the stairs. And there he stopped, his breath catching in his throat. Leo was sitting on the 5th step, his small knees drawn to his chest. He wasn't hiding in his room. He was listening. His head was tilted. His eyes, so often vacant, were fixed on the hallway leading to the living room, where Clara's humming softened into the quiet clink of silver, where being put away. Alexander stood frozen, a statue of paternal failure. He hadn't been able to coax his son out with toys, with bribes, with frustrated pleas. Yet the humming of a black maid had drawn him from his fortress. The next day he came home early. He found Clara not cleaning, but sitting on the floor in the hallway outside Leo's closed door. She had a small basket of buttons and threads, and was patiently sewing a loose button onto his favorite stuffed dog, which Leo had apparently slid out to her. "What are you doing?" Alexander's voice was sharp, an automatic defense. She looked up, her eyes calm. "Mending, sir. I pay you to clean. Some things need mending more than floors, Mr. Croft," she said softly, her needle moving in and out of the fabric with a steady, practiced rhythm. He had no retort. Her words, simple and unassuming, pierced his armor. He looked at the closed door, behind which his son was hiding, and for the first time, he didn't see a problem to be solved, but a pain to be understood. A pain that mirrored his own. Days later, he broke his own rule. He found himself standing in the doorway of the West Wing study as Clara was dusting the hall table nearby. The door was ajar. "That was my father's study," he found himself saying, the words unfamiliar on his tongue. He never spoke of personal history. He built this company from nothing. He taught me that sentiment is a weakness, that to feel is to fail. He gestured to the pristine, cold room. "This is the heart of that lesson." Clara stopped her work and turned to him. She didn't offer pity. She offered a truth. "A heart that isn't allowed to feel, sir, isn't a heart at all. It's just a stone, and stones can't love. They can only weigh things down." In that moment, Alexander Croft, the billionaire CEO, felt the first seismic shift in his foundation. The maid wasn't just cleaning his house. She was gently, patiently, dusting the neglected corners of his soul. And for the first time since his world had collapsed, he allowed a crack of light to get in, not to fix anything, not yet, but just to see what was there, in the darkness he had called strength. The confrontation happened over a shattered vase. It was a hideous, expensive Ming Dynasty piece Evelyn had chosen. Alexander found it in pieces on the floor of the formal lounge, Leo standing frozen amidst the porcelain shards, his small face a mask of terror. Before Alexander could summon the cold, disappointed tone his own father would have used, Clara was there. She didn't look at the vase, she looked at Leo. "Oh my," she said, her voice a warm blanket. "That was a mighty crash. Are you hurt, sweet child?" Leo shook his head, a single tear tracing a path through his dust-smudged cheek. "Good. Fingers and toes are much more important than old clay," she said, moving to him and kneeling. "Now let's see. This looks like a job for two." She looked up at Alexander, whose anger had been completely derailed by her reaction. "Sir, would you fetch the dustpan and brush from the kitchen closet? We'll need the big one." Stunned into compliance, Alexander did something he hadn't done in 20 years. He fetched a cleaning tool for his employee. When he returned, Clara was showing Leo how to gather the larger pieces safely into a box. "See, we handle the broken things with care. They can't be what they were, but they don't have to be just trash." Alexander stood, holding the dustpan, watching this woman impart a wisdom to his son that he himself had never possessed. "They can't be what they were, but they don't have to be just trash." The words echoed in the hollow chamber of his chest. Later that evening, after Leo was in bed, not with his door closed, but left ajar, Alexander found Clara preparing to leave. "Clara," he said, his voice rough, "a word." She turned, waiting. "The boy, he responded to you, today." He struggled, the words foreign and clumsy. "I don't know how to reach him." Clara looked at him not as an employer, but as a man, a lost one. "Perhaps, sir, you are trying to reach him from too far away. You must get on the floor." "I beg your pardon." "The world looks very different from the floor. It's where the lost buttons are. It's where the best secrets are hidden. It's where little boys live when they are hurting. You can't talk down to a pain like that. You have to sit with it." The next day, Saturday, Alexander dismissed his driver and his weekend staff. The penthouse was silent, but for once the silence felt expectant, not oppressive. He saw Leo peeking from his room. Taking a breath that felt like the most courageous act of his life, Alexander walked to the living room, ignored the expensive sofa, and lowered himself to the carpet. He sat, his knees awkwardly bent in his tailored suit. Leo watched from the hallway for a long time. Then, inch by inch, he came into the room. He didn't look at his father, but he sat on the floor opposite him, picking at the intricate pattern of the Persian rug. "Your mother," Alexander began, then stopped. The old script blame, bitterness rose up. He discarded it. It was useless. he started again, his voice softer. I miss her too, and I am very sad and very sorry. Leo's head lifted. His eyes, so like Alexander's, met his. It was the first real connection in months. From the doorway, Clara watched, a silent, approving presence. She didn't intervene. She had simply prepared the ground. The healing was not instantaneous. It was a mosaic of small moments pieced together with care. Clara's presence was the mortar. She cooked meals they began to eat together at the small kitchen table, ignoring the formal dining room. She left books of poetry open on the coffee table, passages about resilience and hope subtly underlined. She never offered unsolicited advice, but when Alexander asked, her answers were simple and profound. One afternoon, he found her looking at a faded photograph on his desk, of him and his father, both faces stern. He thought love was a transaction. Alexander found himself confessing. You give performance, you get approval. I thought I'd married for love, but I think I just wanted a more agreeable transaction. I never learned how to just love. Clara picked up the photograph. You can't give what you never got, Mr. Croft, but you can learn. It's never too late to learn a new language of the heart. Months passed. Penthouse began to feel less like a showcase and more like a home. Laughter, tentative at first, then genuine, echoed off the marble. Leo started talking, then chattering, then asking a million questions his father no longer felt he had to have all the answers to. Alexander realized Clara was no longer his maid. She was their anchor, their healer. The day he finally invited her to sit with them at the table, not to serve, but to share a meal, was the day he understood. She broke the bread and passed it to him, and the simple act felt sacramental. He looked at her, this woman of immense quiet strength and deep wisdom, who had entered his life to clean his floors and had instead cleansed his spirit. You saved us, Clara, he said, the words utterly inadequate. She smiled, a warm, gracious curve of her lips. No, Mr. Croft, I just held the space. You and that beautiful boy did the saving yourselves. You just needed to be reminded that you knew how. On her last day, before she moved to help another family part-time, Alexander handed her an envelope. It was not a bonus. It was a scholarship fund in her name, for young people in her community wanting to study psychology and counseling. You have a gift, he said, his voice thick with emotion. This isn't payment. It's an investment in the healing of others. Clara took it, her eyes glistening. Thank you, Alexander. It was the first time she had used his first name. She left as quietly as she had arrived, but the space she left behind was not empty. It was filled with the lasting gifts of resilience, understanding, and a love that was no longer a transaction, but a freely given, powerful force. Alexander Croft, the man of stone, had learned to feel, and in feeling, he had finally learned to live. Moral of the story: true strength is not found in building walls against pain, but in the courage to sit with it, understand it, and allow the compassion of others to help you mend. The most profound healing often comes from the most unexpected places, and it begins